The conference hall buzzed with voices from 100 different worlds, but Zara felt more alone than ever, standing in the corner of the massive room with its crystal walls that reflected starlight from outside the space station. She watched the delegates move in their groups, laughing and talking, while she stood by herself holding a glass of something blue that tasted like metal and sadness. Her people, the Vexari, had sent her here as their representative, but everyone knew the truth, and she was damaged goods in their eyes because her betrothed had rejected her in front of the entire council 3 months ago. The memory still burned in her chest like acid. Zara had 4 arms, which was normal for her species, and her skin shimmered between purple and silver depending on her emotions. But right now it was a dull gray that showed her shame to anyone who bothered to look. Most delegates did not bother to look at her. The Vexari were a proud warrior race, and being rejected by a mate was the worst thing that could happen to someone, and it meant something was deeply wrong with you, and now Zara carried that mark everywhere she went. Her former betrothed Krell had announced to everyone that she was too soft and too emotional, and too interested in other cultures, and he said these things like they were crimes, and in Vexari society, they might as well be. After the rejection, Zara had 2 choices, and she could stay on her homeworld and live as an outcast forever, or she could volunteer for the diplomatic corps, where at least she would be far away from the whispers and the stares. She chose to leave. Now she stood at the Galactic Peace Summit on Station Harmony, representing a people who did not want her while surrounded by aliens who did not know her. The irony was not lost on her. Zara took another sip of the terrible blue drink and watched a group of insectoid trill delegates clicking and chirping at each other in what seemed like a very animated conversation, and nearby a pair of gaseous Nefti floated in their containment suits, gesturing with their energy tendrils. Then she saw him. He was human, and she had studied humans before coming here, because Earth was one of the newer species to join the Galactic Council, and humans were fascinating in ways that made other species nervous. This human stood near the buffet table looking at the food options with an expression that could only be described as suspicious. And he was tall for his species, maybe 6 feet, with dark hair that was slightly too long and brown eyes that seemed to notice everything. He wore the simple gray uniform of the Earth Diplomatic Service, and his name tag read, Kyle Bennett. Zara had heard things about humans, and they were supposed to be dangerous because they came from a death world where everything tried to kill them. But they were also supposed to be incredibly loyal and stubborn and emotional in ways that made the more logical species uncomfortable. They bonded with anything, and they had brought their pack bonding instincts to the stars, and there were stories about humans adopting alien crew members as family, and humans refusing to leave anyone behind even when it made no tactical sense. The other species did not know what to make of them. Zara watched Kyle Bennett pick up something that looked like a pastry and sniff it carefully before taking a small bite, and his face went through several expressions in quick succession before he put the pastry back down and took a long drink of water. She found herself smiling for the first time in weeks. Maybe it was the loneliness, or maybe it was the way he looked as out of place as she felt. But Zara made a decision, and she walked across the conference hall toward the human. Her 4 arms moved nervously as she approached, and she could feel her skin shifting from gray to a nervous pale purple. Kyle Bennett looked up as she got close, and his eyes widened slightly as he took in her appearance, but he did not look disgusted or afraid, and he just looked curious. Hello, she said in Standard Galactic, and her translator implant buzzed slightly as it converted her words. And I am Zara of the Vexari. The human smiled, and it was a genuine smile that reached his eyes. And hello, Zara of the Vexari. And I am Kyle Bennett of Earth, but you probably saw my name tag. And that was a terrible introduction. Let me try again. And hi. I am Kyle. And I am very lost at this party. Zara felt something warm spread through her chest. And you are lost. Kyle gestured at the room. And I have been to exactly 3 of these diplomatic functions, and I still have no idea what I am doing. And my government sent me because I am good at talking to people, but these are not people, and I mean they are people, but they are not human people, and I am making this worse. Am I making this worse? You are doing fine, Zara said, and she realized she was still smiling, and I also feel lost at this party. Kyle looked relieved and, okay, good. So it is not just me. And he paused, and can I ask you something? And it might be rude, and I apologize if it is rude, but why do you have 4 arms? And that is amazing, by the way. Zara blinked, and most species asked about her arms. But they asked in clinical ways, or they did not ask at all because it was obvious, but Kyle asked like he was genuinely interested and not judging. My species evolved on a world with very tall forests, she explained, and we needed extra limbs to climb and hunt, and now we keep all 4 arms, even though most of us live in cities. That makes so much sense, Kyle said, and his eyes were bright with interest. And humans only have 2 arms because we evolved to walk upright on plains, and we needed our hands, free for tools and weapons, and now I am doing that thing where I talk too much about evolution. Sorry, Zara laughed, and it felt strange because she had not laughed in so long, and no, please continue, and I find human evolution fascinating. They talked for the next hour, and Kyle told her about Earth with its blue oceans and green forests, and Zara told him about Vexar with its purple skies and crystal mountains, and neither of them noticed the other delegates or the stares they were getting. Kyle was easy to talk to, and he listened when she spoke, and he asked questions that showed he actually cared about the answers, and he made jokes that were sometimes bad but always made her smile. When the reception ended, Kyle asked if she wanted to get dinner, and Zara said yes, even though Vexari did not usually eat with other species. They went to one of the station restaurants, and Kyle ordered something called pizza, and Zara ordered a protein synthesis cube, and they sat across from each other and talked about everything and nothing. So why do you look sad? Kyle asked suddenly, and his brown eyes were serious. Zara froze. And what do you mean? You smile when we talk, but there is sadness behind your eyes, Kyle said gently, and I recognize it because I have seen it before, and you do not have to tell me, but I want you to know I see it. Something broke inside Zara, and maybe it was because this human stranger saw her in a way her own people had not, or maybe it was because she had been holding everything inside for so long, but she told him everything. She told him about Krell and the rejection and the shame and the loneliness, and she told him about how Vexari society worked, and how she was marked now as unworthy. And she told him about the nights she spent wondering what was wrong with her. Kyle listened to everything, and when she finished, he was quiet for a long moment. That is the stupidest thing I have ever heard, he said. Finally, Zara stared at him. And what, your former betrothed rejected you because you are interested in other cultures, Kyle said, and his voice was angry now. And he rejected you because you have emotions, and because you are not a copy of every other Vexari, and that is the stupidest reason to reject someone. But among my people, Zara started, your people are wrong. Kyle interrupted, and he reached across the table and took one of her hands in both of his. And Zara, you are incredible, and you are smart and curious and kind, and any person who cannot see that is an idiot, and I have known you for 3 hours, and I can see it. Zara felt her eyes burning, and Vexari did not cry, but suddenly she wanted to. And you barely know me. I know enough, Kyle said firmly, and I know that you deserve better than what your people gave you, and I know that being different is not a flaw. They sat like that for a while, with Kyle holding her hand and Zara trying to process everything he had said, and no one had ever defended her like that, and no one had ever made her feel like being herself was okay. Over the next 3 weeks, Kyle and Zara spent almost every free moment together, and they explored the station and attended meetings and ate meals together and talked about their worlds. Zara learned that Kyle had been a teacher before joining the diplomatic service, and he had wanted to help people understand each other better, and he told her about his family back on Earth and his parents who ran a small farm, and his sister who was a doctor. Kyle learned that Zara loved art and music, and she had studied the cultures of a dozen different species before coming to the summit, and she told him about the crystal gardens on Vexar and the singing ceremonies her people held under the triple moons. They also learned about each other in smaller ways, and Kyle liked coffee more than any being should, and Zara hummed when she was concentrating, and Kyle made terrible puns that somehow became funny, and Zara would unconsciously reach out with one of her arms to touch his shoulder when they walked. Other delegates noticed, and the Vexari delegation was already sending angry messages to Zara about improper behavior, and the human delegation asked Kyle if he knew what he was doing, and Kyle told them he knew exactly what he was doing. On the 25th Third day, Zara received a transmission from her homeworld, and it was from the High Council, and they were recalling her immediately. She sat in her quarters, staring at the message and feeling her heart sink, and they said her behavior was unacceptable, and they said she was bringing shame to all Vexari, and they said she needed to return home and accept her place. Kyle found her there an hour later, sitting in the dark, with tears streaming down her face. And yes, Vexari could cry when they were upset. Enough what happened, he asked, and he sat next to her on the floor. They are taking me home, Zara whispered, and I cannot stay here anymore. Kyle read the message and his expression grew dark. And they cannot do this. They can, Zara said, and I am a representative of my people, and if they recall me, I must go. What will happen when you get home? Kyle asked. Zara closed her eyes, and I will be assigned to maintenance work somewhere far from the cities, and I will never be allowed to leave Vexar again, and I will never have a mate or a family, and I will live out my life alone. That is not acceptable, Kyle said firmly. It is my reality. Zara replied, and her voice broke. Kyle was quiet for a long moment, and then he said something that changed everything. And marry me. Zara turned to stare at him. And what did you say? Marry me. Kyle repeated, and he took both her hands in his. And I am serious, and marry me. And then they cannot recall you, Kyle. That is insane, Zara said. And we have known each other for 3 weeks. No, Kyle said, and I do not care, and Zara, I have never met anyone like you, and you are brilliant and beautiful, and you make me laugh, and I love the way you see the world, and I love how curious you are, and I love talking to you, and I do not want you to go back to a planet where they will crush everything that makes you special. But you do not love me, Zara whispered, and this would be a legal arrangement, and you would be trapped. Kyle smiled, and who says, I do not love you, and Zara, I have been falling for you since the moment you walked over to me at that reception, and I have dated people for years and felt less than I feel for you right now, and maybe that makes me crazy, but I do not care. Zara felt her heart's racing and her skin shifted through a dozen colors, and this is not how these things work, and you are supposed to court someone for months, and you are supposed to have family approval, and you are supposed to be sure. I am sure, Kyle said, and his brown eyes were intense. And I am more sure about this than I have been about anything in my life, and you do not have to say yes, and I will not pressure you. But if you want to stay here, and if you want to continue being a diplomat, and if you want to be with someone who sees you for who you really are, then marry me. I cannot ask you to do this, Zara said, and tears were streaming down her face again. You are not asking, Kyle said gently. And I am offering, and there is a difference. What if it does not work? Zara asked, and what if we are making a mistake? Then we will figure it out together, Kyle said, but I think we are going to surprise everyone, and I think we are going to be amazing. Zara looked at this human who had seen her at her lowest, and who had defended her, and who had spent 3 weeks making her feel like she mattered, and she thought about going back to Vexar and living the rest of her life in shame. And she thought about staying here with Kyle. The choice was not as hard as it should have been. Yes, she whispered. Kyle blinked, and yes. Yes, I will marry you, Zara said, and her voice was stronger now, and I do not know if this is wise, and I do not know if this will work, but yes, I will marry you, Kyle. Laughed and pulled her into a hug, and Zara wrapped all 4 arms around him and held on like he was the only solid thing in the universe. They were married 2 days later, in a small ceremony on the station, and human law recognized it, and Vexari law had to recognize it, because Kyle was now technically part of the Vexari family structure by marriage. The High Council was furious, and the human government was confused, and the other delegates did not know what to think, and Kyle and Zara did not care about any of it. Zara sent a message to her homeworld, informing them that she was now legally bound to a human, and therefore could not be recalled without breaking several interspecies treaties. And the message she got back was full of anger and threats and legal language. But the bottom line was clear, and they could not make her come home. Kyle moved into her quarters, and they spent the first week figuring out how to share space. And Kyle took up more room than she expected, and Zara needed less sleep than he did, and they both had habits that annoyed the other. But they also learned how to be married, and Kyle would make her coffee in the morning. Even though she did not drink coffee, but she appreciated the gesture, and Zara would sit with him while he worked and use her forearms to massage his shoulders when he got tense, and they would talk late into the night about everything. The summit ended after another month, and both Earth and Vexar wanted their representatives to return home, but Kyle and Zara requested a joint assignment. Instead, they were sent to the border station between human and Vexari space with orders to improve relations between the two species, and most people thought it was a punishment, and they were just trying to get rid of the problem couple, but Kyle and Zara saw it as an opportunity. The border station was small and old, and not many people wanted to be there, but Kyle and Zara threw themselves into their work, and they organized cultural exchanges, and they helped resolve trade disputes, and they made sure humans and Vexari actually talked to each other instead of just maintaining cold diplomatic silence. It was not easy. And there were Vexari who refused to work with Zara because of her marriage, and there were humans who did not trust her because she was alien. But Kyle and Zara worked together, and slowly things began to change. They also built a life together, and they turned their small quarters into a home with human plants and Vexari crystals, and they cooked meals together even, though their species had very different dietary needs, and they celebrated holidays from both cultures. 6 months into their marriage, Kyle woke up one morning to find Zara staring at him. "What is wrong?" he asked, and his voice was rough with sleep. "Nothing is wrong," Zara said softly, "and I just realized something." "What did you realize?" Kyle asked. "I love you," Zara said, and the words came out simple and clear, "and I do not know when it happened. And maybe it was that first night when you held my hand, and maybe it was when you proposed, and maybe it was yesterday when you sang that terrible song to cheer me up, but I love you, Kyle." "Bennett." Kyle smiled and reached up to touch her face. "And I love you too." "Zara Bennett, and I have loved you for a while now." They kissed, and Vexari kissing was different from human kissing, but they had figured out how to make it work, and afterward they lay together in the quiet of the morning. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked, "and marrying me so quickly?" "Never," Kyle said, immediately. "And do you?" "Sometimes I wonder what would have happened if I had gone home," Zara admitted, but then I remember that I would be alone and I would be miserable, and no, I do not regret it, and you are the best thing that ever happened to me." Kyle pulled her closer. "And you are the best thing that ever happened to me." A year after their marriage, Zara and Kyle were called to attend another Galactic Peace Summit, and this time they arrived together as a married couple and as successful diplomats who had improved relations between their species. The reception was similar to the one where they had met, but this time Zara did not stand alone in the corner, and this time she stood with Kyle, and they talked to delegates from a dozen different worlds. Krell was there representing Vexar, and he looked at Zara with something between disgust and confusion. "You married a human," he said when he finally approached them, and his voice was cold. "I did," Zara replied, and she kept her voice steady. "And this is my husband, Kyle." Bennett Krell looked Kyle up and down. "And you have brought shame to all Vexari." Kyle stepped forward, and his voice was calm but firm. "And Zara has brought honor to the Vexari, and she has done more for your species' reputation in 1 year than most diplomats do in 10, and if you cannot see that, then you are as foolish as I have heard." Krell stiffened. "And you dare speak to me that way?" "Human, I dare speak the truth," Kyle said, "and Zara is incredible, and I am grateful every day that you were stupid enough to reject her because it meant I got to marry her instead." Other delegates were watching now, and Zara felt her skin shifting colors with her emotions. But Kyle took her hand and squeezed it gently. "Come on," Kyle said to Zara, "and let us go talk to people who are actually worth our time." They walked away, and Zara felt something lift from her chest. And for the first time since the rejection, she did not feel shame, and she felt pride that night in their hotel room. Kyle found Zara standing by the window looking out at the stars. "You were amazing today," he said. And coming up behind her, "You defended me," Zara said softly. "Always," Kyle promised, "and I will always defend you." Zara turned to face him, and, "You know, this marriage was supposed to be just a legal arrangement, and we were supposed to be just helping each other." Kyle smiled. "And I know. And funny how that worked out. I did not think I could be happy again," Zara admitted. "And after Krell rejected me, I thought something was broken inside me. But you make me happy, Kyle, and you make me feel like I am enough." You are more than enough, Kyle said, and he took her hands in his, and you are everything. 2 years after their marriage, Earth and Vexar signed a formal alliance, and it was the first real alliance between a DEATHWORLD species and a warrior species, and everyone said it was impossible, and everyone said it would never last. At the signing ceremony, Kyle and Zara stood together as representatives of both worlds, and when the treaty was signed, the room erupted in applause. Later, the human ambassador pulled Kyle aside, and everyone thought you were crazy when you married her. I know, Kyle said, and everyone thought it was just a political stunt. The ambassador continued. No, Kyle said again, but you two actually made it work, the ambassador said, and he sounded impressed, and you built something real. We did. Kyle agreed, and he looked across the room at Zara, who was talking animatedly with a group of Vexari delegates, and we built something amazing. The ambassador followed his gaze, and she has changed things, And there are other Vexari now who are questioning the old ways, and there are young Vexari who see what she has accomplished, and they want the same freedom to choose their own paths. Good, Kyle said simply, and everyone deserves that freedom. 3 years after their marriage, Zara discovered she was pregnant, and it should have been impossible because humans and Vexari were not genetically compatible. But the doctors said that sometimes biology found a way, and they said the baby would be healthy, and they said it would be a miracle. Kyle cried when she told him, and he held her, and he said he could not believe how lucky he was. Zara cried, too, and she said she had never imagined she could have this, and a mate who loved her and a career she was proud of, and now a child. Their daughter was born 6 months later, and she had 2 arms and skin that shifted colors and Kyle's brown eyes, and Zara's curiosity, and they named her Hope because that felt right. The Vexari High Council sent a formal message recognizing the child as Vexari, and the human government sent a formal message recognizing the child as human, and Hope became the first person to have dual citizenship between Earth and Vexar. She also became a symbol, and a symbol of what was possible when people stopped being afraid and started being curious, and a symbol of what love could create. 5 years after their marriage, Kyle and Zara were transferred back to the main space station where they had met, and this time they were coming as senior diplomats with an excellent record and but you made it work, Lyra whispered. And you found someone. And you are happy. I'm happy, Zara confirmed, but it was not easy, and I had to be brave, and I had to believe I was worth more than what my people said I was worth. And do you believe that about yourself? Lyra hesitated, and I do not know. Then let me tell you something, Zara said, and her voice was firm, and you are here, and you volunteered to represent your people even after they hurt you. And that takes incredible strength, and you are curious about other cultures, and that takes wisdom, and you are already more. Then they said you were. Lyra's skin shifted from gray to a pale purple. And thank you, Zara stood and smiled, and stick around, and I will introduce you to some people, and who knows, and maybe you will meet someone special at one of these terrible receptions. Kyle laughed and took Zara's hand, and that worked out pretty well for us. That night after Hope was asleep, Kyle and Zara sat together on their balcony looking out at the stars. Do you remember when I asked you to marry me? Kyle said. I remember everything. About that day, Zara replied. Do you remember what you said? Zara asked, and you said you did not want me to go back to a planet where they would crush everything that made me special. I meant it. Kyle said you saved me. Zara said softly, and you saved me from a life where I would have been miserable, and you saved me from believing I was broken. You were never broken, Kyle said, and he pulled her close, and you were always perfect, and you just needed someone to see it. We saved each other, Zara corrected, and you were lost at that party too, remember? And you needed someone who understood what it was like to feel out of place. Kyle smiled and okay. Yes, we saved each other. They sat in comfortable silence for a while, and then Zara said something she had been thinking about for months. I want to start a program, she said, and for Vexari, who have been rejected, and I want to help them find new paths, and I want to show them they have options. That is a wonderful idea, Kyle said. And how can I help? Just be yourself, Zara said, and just keep being the person who sees people for who they are, and keep being the person who believes everyone deserves a chance. I can do that, Kyle promised. 10 years after their marriage, Kyle and Zara returned to Vexar for the first time together. And Zara had not been back since her rejection, and she was nervous, but Kyle held her hand and Hope walked between them, asking questions about everything. The Vexari who met them at the spaceport stared, but no one said anything. Negative, and too much had changed, and Zara was too important now, and she had accomplished too much. The High Council requested a meeting, and Zara and Kyle went together, and the council members sat in their high seats and looked down at them. Ambassador Bennett, one of the council members, said, "And we have reviewed your work, and we have reviewed your marriage, and we have discussed what it means for our people." Zara stood tall. "And what have you decided? You have challenged our traditions." The council member continued, "And you have married outside our species, and you have created a child who is not fully Vexari, and many of us believed this was wrong." Past tense. Zara noted. Past tense. The council member agreed, "And because we have seen what you have accomplished, and we have seen how other young Vexari look to you as an example, and we have seen that perhaps our old ways are not the only ways." The council member paused, "And we are creating new laws, and Vexari will no longer be forced into betrothals, and they will be allowed to choose their own mates, and they will be allowed to pursue their own interests without shame. And these changes are because of you." Ambassador Bennett Zara felt tears forming. "And thank you." The council member almost smiled. "And no, Ambassador. And thank you, and you showed us we were wrong, and that took great courage." After the meeting, Kyle found Zara standing in one of the crystal gardens she had told him about years ago. "You did it," he said quietly. "We did it." Zara corrected, "And none of this would have happened if you had not asked me to marry you." Kyle laughed, "And I asked you to marry me because I loved you. And I did not think about changing an entire society. Sometimes love changes everything." Zara said. They stood together in the crystal garden with the purple sky above them, and they thought about everything that had happened. And they thought about how one moment of connection at a diplomatic reception had changed both their lives. Hope ran up to them with a crystal she had found. "And look what I found," she said excitedly. "And it is so pretty. It is beautiful." Kyle agreed, "And just like your mother." Hope hugged Zara. "And I want to be a diplomat when I grow up," she announced. "And I want to help people like you and Daddy." Zara looked at Kyle, and Kyle looked at Zara. And they both smiled because their daughter had already learned the most important lesson, and that everyone deserves a chance, and that love can build bridges between worlds. 15 years after their marriage, Kyle and Zara were offered positions on the Galactic Council itself, and they would be the first married couple to serve together, and they would represent both Earth and Vexar on the day of their appointment ceremony. They stood in front of thousands of beings from hundreds of worlds, and they took their oath to serve with wisdom and compassion. Hope was an adult now, and she was following in her parents' footsteps, and she was building her own bridges between worlds, and she had inherited the best parts of both her parents. Sometimes Kyle still woke up and could not believe how lucky he was, and he would watch Zara sleep, and he would remember the moment she had walked across the conference hall toward him, and he would think about how different his life would have been if she had not been brave enough to introduce herself. Sometimes Zara still thought about that terrible day when Krell had rejected her, and she would feel a ghost of the old pain. But then she would look at everything she had built and everyone she had helped and the family she had created, and she would realize that the rejection had not broken her, and it had freed her. They had been married for 20 years, and they had changed 2 worlds, and they had raised a daughter, and they had proved that love could cross any divide. And it had all started because a lonely alien woman had seen a lonely human man at a party, and she had been brave enough to say hello. That was all it took sometimes, and one moment of courage and one moment of connection and one moment of believing that maybe things could be different. Kyle and Zara Bennett stood together in the conference hall, and they held hands, and they looked out at the stars, and they knew that their story was not over. There were still bridges to build, and there were still people to help, and there were still worlds to bring together, and they would do it together and just like they had always done. Because that is what love does, and it makes you brave, and it makes you strong, and it makes you believe that impossible things can happen. All you have to do is be willing to take the first step.